Hello everyone, and welcome to this special edition of the MSBA Board Report. We are coming to you from the office of the Governor at the State Capitol in Jefferson City, and we are honored to have with us for our discussion the Governor of the State of Missouri, Mike Parson. And Governor, thank you so much for inviting us into your office.
I'm glad you're here. Welcome to the Governor's office.
Well, we have a few questions we'd like to ask you, Governor, related to education issues, but before we do that, I'd just like to ask you about being Governor. You assumed this office under some unusual circumstances. You've been in office for a few months now. You've traveled, it seems like, everywhere across the state of Missouri. What are your impressions, of the state of Missouri and the concerns people have?
I think one of the things that it's important for people to understand is how people have treated me and the First Lady everywhere we've went. The transition period was tough. It was tough for the whole state, but people have been overwhelmingly supportive of what we're doing, no matter what region of the state we've been, and I think that's important for people to understand that. I think everybody wanted somewhat of a little bit of a calmness in the state of Missouri. I think we've been able to deliver that, and it was important for me to get out and make sure everybody knew everything's going to be okay. And really, we just focused on moving forward since day one. Everybody knows kind of what occurred here in our state, and really what we want to do is we want to put Missouri in a positive light, and we really want to move Missouri forward. And I think one of the biggest challenges for us is to talk about that, but now it's getting it done. How are we going to move forward in the state of Missouri? And I think there's a huge opportunity. So I'm excited about it right now. I'm enjoying the part I'm playing in that, and it's just great to work with so many great people across the state.
One of the priorities that you've established, Governor, is workforce development in our state, part of moving the state forward. And that, of course, relates to education, doesn't it?
Right. Oh, that'll be a huge role in it. And I want to say this about the education community since I've been here in the governor's role, trying to figure out how we're going to be workforce development. How are we going to mix the private sector with the educational side of it? And I'm just, right now everybody is so focused on understanding what that need is. So when you look at the education system, at all levels of the education, they really realize now too, hey, we got to be a little more in tune, I want to say, to the private sector. And they're really stepping up and doing that. As I talk to superintendents, if I talk to people in the classrooms and to higher education, you're really seeing that focus. They know that workforce development's important too, and that we got to prepare these young men and young women really for what the workforce is going to be like. So I think there's really just a effort right now to partner with the private sector, with the state sector, and then with the education community. I'm just very optimistic that we're going to find a lot of solutions coming up here in the near future.
Another issue I'd like to ask you about, Governor, is early childhood education and giving more families and children across our state access to early childhood education. Is that something we can move forward on in Missouri, do you think?
You know what? I think that's going to be a discussion. I don't know how quick we're going to move forward on that, but if you want to look at long-term effect of the state of Missouri, if you really want to look how we're going to change society as a whole, it's going to start with early childhood development. I mean, I just think that's going to be a part of the tool. And the quicker we get to those children to really change Missouri, I think will be important. So I think we got to have that discussion if we're really wanting to look at what's best for Missouri. That has challenges sometimes when you start talking early childhood development and everything. But the reality of it is, and I think of it as changes society as a whole. I don't believe you're going to change very many 50, 60-year-old people. I just don't. And I'm in those categories. So, I think we are who we are. But I really do think if you want to change society the way that people have got, I want to say, trapped into society a little bit because of government, a lot of it, But if you can take those young children and give them the tools they need, give them the soft skills they need, give them the education they need, that's how we'll really change who we are in this state. And so early childhood development, it's on the table. We want to try to figure out if that's a possibility to do that at some point. But I do think it needs to be a statewide program.
Mm-hmm. Another issue, Governor, for our schools these days is school safety. And while our schools remain very safe places for our kids, that's a high priority for our local school boards around the state to make sure that environment is as safe as possible so kids can learn. And you're former law enforcement person yourself.
Right.
So do we need to do more on the state level in terms of policy related to school safety?
I think you always want to do more and be practical about it. But anytime we're talking about safety, we need to look at what technology is available out there. How is it that other school systems are really making their school systems safer? But we need to look at that. But I think right now Missouri does a good job on that. I think when you look at the local school boards, what they do, That's a focus of theirs. That's a priority. Because there's one thing, we all know that when it comes to our children, we're all very protective of that. And the last thing that I want as the governor of the state of Missouri is make sure that I'm not giving the school systems the tools they need to keep schools safe. So that's a priority of ours to make sure they got what they need. But I also think it's important that we realize, hey, we got to change with the times. If there's better ways of doing it, let's accept the fact, hey, we need to change too. And again, at the end of the day, it's really about taking care of those kids.
Another issue that we've been concerned about, Governor, is charter schools in our state. And of course, we have charter schools right now in St. Louis and Kansas City. There have been some proposals to expand charter schools beyond those areas to other areas. Do you have any views on charter schools and whether or not they should be expanded in our state?
I think that's going to be something for the board to decide. I think you're going to see the charter school side, the education side of it. The boards are going to work together. I think there's some committees out there, that I know people on both sides of that. But I think you're going to find out some common ground that we can agree on to move forward. I think there's a place for both. I really do. And I think we have to realize that. But it's like anything. It's got to be a fair playing field for everybody. What that is. So, and then the end of it for me is what's important is, what's that input, and what's the result? Because at the end of the day, that's how we want to be judged by that.
Another issue I wanted to ask you about, Governor, is related to what are called education savings accounts. They have different names, but they're the ideas of a tax credit of some sort that, in our view anyway, might end up essentially supporting private schools with tax dollars, which is a concern of ours. Do you have any views on that issue?
Right. Well, you're going to the voucher area where that is and everything. Again, I'm just going to say this. We all know how this argument's been over the years. I've been involved in that on both sides of it, listening to it. I've always been a supporter of public education. Do I think we just continue to do things the way we've done because we've been doing it for 20, 30 years? I don't think government should be run like that. So to answer your question, I don't know if you're going to get that direct answer you want, but the bottom line is I think everything should be on the table. I think we look and see what options are out there. If there's a better way to truly do it, to educate our children, I don't think we should be afraid of that, in some parts of the state. If where I'm from, the public school systems do a great job. Day in and day out, they get it right. They really do. Does that mean all school systems are that way? They're not. And we all know that. So not to say we don't need to address these issues just because we've always done it this way or because we're a little worried about change. I think we got to look at that sometimes. But, there's been no secret in me. I'm supportive of the public education systems in the state. They do a good job. But do I think we're perfect? No, I do not.
And I have to ask you a question related to funding for education, Governor. That's
Right.
always a concern, of local
Right.
school boards.
Yes.
And the state support for that. And specifically, one of the areas that our boards have been concerned about lately has been student transportation funding from the state level, and that the local school districts have had to use more of their budget money to fund student transportation, getting kids to and from school.
Right.
Do you see any prospect for some improvements in transportation funding?
Yeah, I got to ask you though. We were working on appropriations before I was doing this interview. Did you know what we were talking about before we took this interview when it dealt with transportation?
I do not.
I thought maybe you had an inside track into what we're talking about in here. Let me just say this: the transportation is a huge issue, especially in rural Missouri. And that's where I'm from. So transportation we got to address. We still, one of the things we want to do, we're trying to figure out how do we fully fund the formula. We all know what that discussion's been. So you kind of got to do that balancing act there. So we want to fully fund the formula. That's something that, we're going to try to get done. So what we can do, where we can find other streams of revenue to help with transportation, we want to take a look at. But it's an issue out there, fully aware of it, and so we're going to do what we can to help with that situation.
Another important issue that you've dealt with during your time as governor has been the State Board of Education, and you have made some appointments to the State Board, which we think are outstanding appointments, by the way. And the State Board then has moved forward with hiring the Commissioner of Education, Margie Van Dieven. And you made a big issue during this whole process of the importance of the independence of the State Board of Education. Why do you think that's important?
Well, I think it's the way it's set up to be. I think you got to try to take politics out of that as much as possible. And I think as a governor's role is to make sure you put qualified people on there and then let them make the decisions. And anytime you have a board, when you have numerous people, and there's a reason there's a board and there's a reason there's so many people on there, that everybody has their input. And I think for the challenge for me was to try to figure out, okay, who are qualified individuals that you can really put on that board that understands education, that understands the state of Missouri, and how do we make it better? How do we get better? And then the other thing is, sometimes you just got to let them go do their jobs. And even when it's times when they don't always come up with something maybe that I totally agree with or something like that, but that's what they got put there, and that's why you got to have confidence in them to do the right thing. I do think we have a really good board right there right now, and I think we're going to move forward.
Governor Mike Parson, thank you so much for talking with us. We really appreciate you sharing your views on these various issues and inviting us into your office, and we really appreciate the great leadership that you're providing to the state of Missouri as governor.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on this special edition of the MSBA Board Report.